In a small city dressed in winter lights, a kid in snowman pajamas has already solved the big Christmas mystery. Santa is not a magical stranger with perfect chimney physics. Santa is his tired dad in a wrinkled red suit, his determined mom with tape stuck to her fingers, and a wardrobe that hides more polyester than wonder. Instead of ruining the secret, Ethan decides to do something much more dangerous for his parents' sanity. He plays along, he moves belts, he builds carrot towers. He becomes a fake believer, a tiny Santa in an oversized suit, and eventually the quiet guardian of the whole ridiculous tradition. This is a calm bedtime story about the history of the kid who knew, the adults who needed the myth even more than he did, and the strange comfort of keeping a story alive long after you have seen the zipper on the costume. Chapter 1. The Year the Chimney Secret Cracked. On a quiet December evening, the city outside looked like a snow globe someone had decided not to shake too hard. Streetlights in a small suburb outside London glowed in soft halos, and flurries of snow drifted down like they were tired but still trying their best. Inside a small apartment on the third floor of a brick building, a boy named Ethan lay on the living room rug in his snowman pajamas, chin in his hands, staring at the television. Yet another Christmas movie played, the kind where everyone smiles too wide and no one ever argues about whose turn it is to take out the trash. The movie Santa was currently sliding down a spotless chimney that would never pass any real-world safety inspection. He laughed in that deep, polished way that sounded like an actor being told to sound magical for the fourth take in a row. The canned audience laughter was almost louder than the fake snow. Ethan watched it all calmly, like someone reviewing security footage instead of a story. At the wise old age of 8, he had already retired from believing in Santa. Officially, he was still part of the Santa fan club. Unofficially, he was sitting on enough evidence to bring down the whole operation. His parents, Laura and Daniel, did not know that, or they pretended not to know that he knew, or he pretended not to know that they pretended. It had become a complicated, polite arrangement, like everyone in the apartment had silently agreed not to mention that the Emperor was wearing a polyester red suit and had a very familiar aftershave. It had started 2 Christmases ago, the year Ethan stopped seeing Santa as a magical mystery and started seeing him as a slightly clumsy man with a bad hiding strategy. That year, the wrapping paper under the tree had been festive and cheerful, covered in tiny gold stars and little green trees, the usual holiday art. Ethan had admired it early in the evening, the way a detective admires a new file. He liked patterns. He liked noticing things. Adults, he had already discovered, were very bad at noticing that children noticed things. Later that same night, he had gone looking for extra tape in his parents' bedroom. He had a very noble mission involving a broken cardboard spaceship, and possibly a stuffed tiger that needed emergency repairs. The tape usually lived in the top drawer of the bedside table, except that night the drawer was oddly crowded. Ethan had shuffled a stack of winter socks to the side, and then stopped. There, folded neatly where tape should have been, lay a roll of the exact same wrapping paper that currently sat under the tree in the living room. Same stars, same tiny trees, same small misprint where 2 stars overlapped in a slightly crooked way. He stared. The universe paused, as much as a universe can pause. Then a second drawer opened, and there was another roll, and in the wardrobe he found a bag of tags with his own name written on them in his mother's careful handwriting. Somewhere in the apartment the television Santa laughed. Ethan listened to that laugh drifting down the hallway and filed it under new category in his mind: not evidence for magic, evidence for logistics. The second major clue arrived later that night, when he had pretended to wake up for a glass of water. The kitchen light was off, but the living room glowed with a low, warm lamp. Ethan padded quietly across the hallway, stopping just before the doorway. He heard it before he saw it. Ho, ho, ho. The voice was deep, cheerful, and absolutely the same voice that told bad dad jokes at the dinner table. There was the same small pause in the middle, like the speaker was not entirely sure if they were committed to the bit. Ethan leaned a little closer, careful not to be seen. His dad, Daniel, stood near the tree in a red suit that hung slightly crooked on his shoulders. The fake beard sagged on one side like it had already given up on the job. Laura knelt by the sofa, smiling up at him with the expression of someone who loved him very much, but also knew this was not his best work. "You should put the presents a little closer to the front," she murmured, in that voice grown-ups get when they think children are asleep. "Otherwise the kids will not see them right away." Daniel adjusted a box, almost knocked over a mug of milk, and then did another ho-ho-ho that sounded like he was checking if anyone had fallen for it yet. Ethan watched his father, his brain calmly connecting dots. Same wrapping paper, same handwriting on the tags, same voice under the fake beard. The mystery of Santa did not end with a dramatic reveal. It ended with a soft click, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. There was no heartbreak, just a quiet, deep, "Oh. Oh, so this is how it works?" The next day, Ethan did not announce his discovery. He tested it, he inspected the gift tags more closely. The handwriting that said "From Santa" had the same small loop on the letter T that his mother used when she wrote grocery lists. He noticed that Santa's wrapping style was exactly the same chaotic but somehow functional style as his dad's attempts at birthday gifts. He tested the chimney theory too. Their apartment did not actually have what? They had a radiator and a window that whistled in the wind, but no grand brick structure leading to the sky. Santa, supposedly, got in through the locked front door with a door code that only the family and the landlord knew. The movie Santas never mentioned door codes. None of this matched the movies. All of this matched his parents. A few days after Christmas, he found the final piece of evidence. He had been looking for his lost racing car, the blue one with one missing wheel that still somehow managed to win every imaginary race. His search pattern led him into his parents' bedroom again, because most lost items eventually migrated there for reasons no one understood. He opened the main wardrobe, pushed aside a row of hanging shirts, and there it was, the red suit. It hung from a plastic hanger, the fabric oddly flat now that it was not being filled with fake jolly energy. The belt looped over the hook. The fake beard hung from the collar, tangled and slightly bent in the middle. Ethan stepped closer. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and his dad's aftershave. A thin line of dust traced the top of the shoulders, as if the suit had been pulled out last minute and stuffed back just as quickly. He stood there for a long moment, taking it in. This was the legendary outfit, the one that had somehow delivered bikes and board games, stuffed animals and chocolate, long after the stores had closed. This was the costume of a myth, currently crumpling slightly at the shoulder seam. Ethan did not feel betrayed. Not exactly. If anything, he felt like he had just walked backstage at a theatre and discovered that the dragons were made of painted cardboard and teamwork. It was still impressive in its own way, just not the way the stories had promised. He could have marched into the living room and told his parents everything. He could have declared that he knew the truth, that Santa was not a separate magical being but a late-night joint operation named Laura and Daniel. Instead, standing in the wardrobe glow, he felt something else. Power. Not the big dramatic kind, more the quiet, satisfying kind that comes from knowing something you are not supposed to know yet. The grown-up secret, discovered early. He closed the wardrobe slowly and carefully, making sure everything looked exactly the same. The hanger at the same angle, the belt hanging in the same lazy curve, the beard resting where it had been before. He walked back to his room with the certainty that his life had just moved to a different level. The world was not more magical than he thought, it was more organized. And his parents, it turned out, were not just parents, they were also stage managers. Over the next days he watched them differently. When his dad talked about Santa visiting next year, Ethan listened to his voice, noticing the tiny strain at the edges. That quiet worry that one day the kids would stop believing, and Christmas would lose something hard to name. When his mum reminded them to write letters to Santa, he saw the way she glanced at the calendar, already mentally organizing the shopping budget and the store hours. Adults, he realized, needed Santa more than he did, not because they believed in flying reindeer, but because they liked the idea that for one night, someone else was in charge of making everything good. Ethan lay in bed one night, staring at the ceiling while the apartment hummed with the quiet sounds of a winter evening. Traffic in the distance, a neighbour laughing through thin walls, the radiator ticking softly. He thought about marching into the living room and telling them he knew. He imagined their faces, the mixture of relief and sadness, like someone telling a long joke that no longer lands. He thought about Lily, his younger sister, who still talked about Santa like he was an old friend. She was small and serious about cookies for reindeer, and still at the age where magic did not need evidence. He decided he would not take that away from her. Instead, he made a different choice. He would keep the secret. He would let his parents keep their show. He would stay in the audience, at least for now, but he would also start something new. A quiet project, a long game. He would watch the Santa suit. He would watch the wrapping paper. He would watch the late-night whispers and the last-minute store runs. He would see how much his parents wanted the magic to be real, even if they had to build it themselves. And maybe, just maybe, he would play along in his own way. Not as the amazed little kid the stories assumed he was, but as someone who had been backstage and decided, for his own reasons, to let the curtains stay closed. That night, as he drifted towards sleep, he pictured the Santa suit hanging in the dark wardrobe like some kind of costume of power. His dad thought he was the only one who knew about it, but Ethan knew now. Knowing, he discovered, was strangely comforting. It did not make the fairy lights less pretty or the hot chocolate less warm. It just meant that behind the warm glow were tired parents, grocery lists, and a budget that somehow stretched every December. It turned out the truth was not the enemy of magic. It was just the backstage lighting. He smiled into his pillow, feeling older in a way no birthday could grant. Knowing the truth, he realized, gave him options. He could ruin the game, or he could quietly influence it. He chose the second. Ethan decided that from now on, Christmas would not just be something happening to him. It would be something he watched, studied, and maybe gently nudged. He would start with the Santa suit. Chapter 2. Santa Suit in the Wardrobe of Power. By the time the next December rolled into the small city outside London, the Santa suit had become more than an outfit to Ethan. It had become a symbol. A slightly dusty polyester symbol, but still, the wardrobe in his parents' bedroom might as well have been labelled Centre of Operations in glowing red letters. Instead, it was just plain white wood, slightly chipped at the edges, humming gently every time the old building shifted in the wind. Inside, behind rows of work shirt and winter coats, hung the suit. Ethan checked on it the way other kids might check whether snow had started falling yet. He never opened the wardrobe wider than he needed. He always moved the hangers back to their exact places. If he shifted something by accident, he corrected it with the precision of a museum curator who was definitely not supposed to be touching the exhibit. On the first Saturday of December, he slipped into the bedroom while his parents were both in the kitchen pretending not to burn pancakes. He opened the wardrobe just wide enough and peeked inside. The Santa suit was still there, a burst of red among neutral fabrics. The fake beard hung from the hanger, the elastic stretching slightly, the way elastic always does when it has seen some things and would like to retire. He leaned closer. There was that familiar mixture of laundry soap and his dad's aftershave, a faint hint of the dust that had settled since last year. There was something strangely comforting about it, like the smell of a very specific family tradition. He did not touch it the first few times. He just checked that it was there, that Christmas operations were loaded and ready. Knowing the exact location of the myth felt like having a secret map. Then, mutt afternoon, curiosity sharpened by boredom, he decided to experiment. If this suit was the core of the operation, what would happen if he changed something? Very small out, that she started thinking, no, that might pick a trait, like something the really real you can keep us. He started with the belt. The belt usually hung neatly over the hook of the hanger. Ethan lifted it off with careful fingers and placed it in the bottom drawer of the wardrobe instead, under a folded pile of scarves. The move was small, not enough to scream prank, just enough to whisper, "Are you paying attention?" He closed everything, smoothed the comforter on the bed where he had knelt, and walked away. That evening at bedtime, he heard his parents talking in their room. The voices were low, but the walls were loyal to their job of not being entirely soundproof. "I am sure I left it on the hanger," his dad muttered. "You probably did," his mum replied in that calm tone that meant she was choosing peace over accuracy. "Maybe you moved it when you were looking for the winter jacket." There was a pause. Ethan heard drawers sliding open, a soft "ha" from his father when he finally found the belt in the drawer. He never mentioned it to Ethan. But at breakfast the next morning, his dad seemed to look at the kids a little more closely, like he was checking if one of them had upgraded their innocence settings overnight. Ethan ate his toast and kept his face neutral. The experiment had worked. The Santa suit was being monitored on both sides now. Over the next week, he ran more tests. One day he switched the boot so that the left one faced right and the right one faced left. Another day he moved the fake beard so it hung over the shoulder of a regular shirt instead of the red jacket. He never did anything big enough to be obviously deliberate. Just small, plausible mistakes. The kind adults blamed on themselves. Each time he listened later to the soft ruster of discovery. His dad making confused sounds, his mum quietly suggesting that he was probably just tired. Christmas did that to grown-ups, made them forget whether they had already wrapped something, or whether they had already told the same story 3 times in one evening. Through it all, Ethan watched, taking mental notes. His family was a small, slightly chaotic unit of 4. Laura worked at a local office, answering emails and juggling spreadsheets that she tried not to think about after 5 in the afternoon. She liked candles, warm socks, and Christmas music that was not too loud. Daniel worked at a hardware store, which meant he had extremely confident opinions about power tools and a tendency to fix anything in the apartment with more enthusiasm than necessary. He loved Christmas with the earnest intensity of someone who thought fairy lights could fix at least 30% of life's problems. Lily, younger by a few years, was still fully committed to the Santa project. She wrote lists, decorated the edges with stars, and asked serious logistical questions about reindeer nutrition. Ethan observed as though he had been hired as the quiet narrator of their holiday season. He noticed how his dad's shoulders relaxed when he talked about Santa, how his voice got a little louder, a little more animated, how he wore a small, proud smile when he mentioned that Santa might be planning something extra special this year. He noticed his mum's half-amused, half-fond expression whenever his dad went off on a long explanation about elves and toy production, the kind of look that said, "You are ridiculous and I would not change that." There was some gentle comedy in watching his dad basic sell a story he had to physically assemble himself in the evenings. One night at dinner, Lily asked how Santa got into apartments with door codes. She was frowning at her mashed potatoes, clearly bothered by this technical detail. Ethan watched with interest. He knew this was the type of question that could break a weaker Santa narrative. Daniel did not hesitate. "Santa knows the codes for every door," he said confidently. Ethan almost applauded. No hesitation, no backup plan, just pure commitment. Lily seemed satisfied. Ethan, on the other hand, added another line to the file in his head labeled "Dad will absolutely improvise." The second phase of Ethan's quiet operation began when he realized something important. His parents were not just hiding the Santa truth to protect the kids, they were also hiding it to protect themselves. He saw it one evening when his dad came home from work later than usual, shoulders sagging, hands still faintly dusty from cardboard boxes and shelves. He dropped into a chair with that particular sound adults made when gravity won. "Rough day?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. His dad nodded. "Christmas rush. Everyone wants everything fixed before the holidays." Then, almost as if he had pressed a switch inside himself, Daniel brightened. "But hey, Christmas soon. Santa is coming." It was like watching someone put on an invisible suit long before the red came out of the wardrobe. The Santa role was more than the costume. It was the idea that he could, for a few days, make his kids happy with surprises and warm lights and too much dessert. Ethan understood something he had not fully grasped last year. For his dad, Santa was not just a lie. It was a mask that helped him feel like a hero in a world that sometimes treated him like an extra. So Ethan made a decision. His experiments would never be cruel. He would nudge, tease, and confuse, but he would not break the illusion in a way that would leave his dad standing in the middle of a ruined stage. That would not be funny. That would just be damage. With that rule in place, he continued. One particular Saturday afternoon, when the snow outside had decided to lean into the whole winter postcard thing, Ethan stood in front of the wardrobe again. The suit hung there, patient. He reached out and adjusted the angle of the hanger so the red jacket faced a little more toward the door. Barely anything. The kind of change you notice only if you are already nervous about forgetting things. Later that night, he saw his dad open the wardrobe. Daniel froze, staring at the suit. "I am pretty sure I did not leave it that way," he murmured. "Maybe the hangers just shifted when you opened the door yesterday," his mom said from the bed, filing her nails with the focus of someone who had learned to choose her battles. "Maybe," he replied, not sounding convinced. He closed the wardrobe more carefully than usual. Ethan watched from his own doorway, hidden by shadows and good timing. He felt a small flicker of satisfaction. His dad was not doubting the existence of Santa. He was doubting his own memory, which, in its own low-stakes way, was extremely entertaining. In the middle of all this, regular life continued. School, homework, after-school snacks that pretended to be healthy, holiday concerts where children sang out of tune while parents filmed every second like the world was going to run out of memory space tomorrow. At night, Ethan lay in bed and thought about his strange role. He was a kid who knew the truth but played along. He was an actor who had seen the script but decided to stay in character anyway. He was also, increasingly, someone who kind of enjoyed watching his parents be fools for the sake of joy. There was something reassuring about their efforts. They were not perfect. They forgot things, repeated themselves, hid belts badly, and occasionally burned cookies, but they kept trying. Every year they rebuilt the same story with fairy lights and glitter and late-night whispered rapping. Ethan realized that his knowledge did not separate him from them. It actually connected him in a new way. He saw their work. He saw their planning. He saw their worry and their love, tangled together like the boxes of lights that came out of storage every year. Knowing all that made the Santa act less about lying and more about dedication. One evening, when snow fluttered lazily past the streetlight outside, Ethan stood in front of the wardrobe for longer than usual. He looked at the red suit and imagined his dad putting it on again soon, adjusting the belt, tugging at the beard, trying to sound deep and jolly. He imagined the way Lily's face would light up, the way his mum would smile even while she pretended to be mildly unimpressed. He smiled to himself. This wardrobe, he decided, was not just a hiding place. It was a control room. A fragile, funny, human control room for a holiday that tried very hard to pretend it was run by magic, and he, Ethan, had access. From now on, he would not just be the kid waiting for presents. He would be the quiet guardian of the Santa suit, the one who made tiny adjustments, watched reactions, and learned more each year about the strange way grown-ups loved. He would let his parents think they were the only ones managing the show. He knew he was now part of the backstage crew. Chapter 3: Operation Experimental Believer. The Monday after the Santa Belt relocation incident, Ethan woke with a new idea stretching in his mind like a cat. It was ridiculous, a little dangerous, and exactly the kind of thing that made winter break worth existing. Up until now, he had been operating as quiet observer and subtle wardrobe saboteur. He nudged, he watched, he collected data. But what if, he thought as he stared at the ceiling, he went in the opposite direction for a while? What if he became the most enthusiastic Santa believer the apartment had ever seen? The idea made him smile into his pillow. From his parents' point of view, there were only two obvious options. Either the kids still believed, or they did not. The middle ground, where Child knew the entire backstage operation and yet decided to lean into the performance, was probably not on their list of expected realities, which made it perfect. He got dressed in his usual school uniform and padded into the kitchen, where the familiar morning chaos was already swirling. The kettle hissed, the toaster clicked. The cereal box leaned on its side like it had given up on standing straight. Laura moved between the counter and the table with practiced efficiency, assembling breakfast like a tired magician. Daniel sat with a mug of coffee, hair still doing its best impression of a startled hedgehog. Lily hummed to herself, building a fortress out of cereal pieces before actually eating any of them. Ethan slid into his chair and waited. Timing, he had learned, was everything. His dad took a sip of coffee and made the small sound all adults seem to make when hot liquid hit a cold soul. The window beside the table showed an outside world washed in pale winter light, the kind that seemed undecided about what emotion it wanted to have. Then Ethan casually launched his experiment. "So," he said in his most innocent voice, "how exactly does Santa deal with apartment buildings?" His man paused mid-reach toward the jam jar. His dad blinked. Lily looked up, instantly alert. Ethan kept going, pretending not to notice the silence he had just invited to breakfast. "I mean, houses are easy. Roof, chimney, cinematic entrance, done. But our building has a locked main door and the door code changes every year. Does he get a newsletter or does he have to ring every doorbell?" He watched his dad closely. Daniel set his mug down with the careful focus of someone who knew he was walking into a trap, but did not know exactly what kind. "Santa," he said, "knows a lot more than a door code." Ethan nodded, face serious. "Right. Because he knows who is on the nice list and all that. But does he go floor by floor? Is there a route plan? Does he have like a map that says 3rd floor, apartment 2, likes dinosaur books, please avoid squeaky floorboard near the radiator?" Lily giggled, delighted by the detail. Their dad glanced at Laura. Her expression held that familiar mix of amusement and warning. The silent message was clear. You started this legend, you handle the questions. Daniel inhaled slowly, then leaned in with exaggerated seriousness. He said that Santa has a system. He said Santa has helpers that keep track of codes and keys, and that sometimes, if the building is really complicated, Santa arrives a little early and hides the presents somewhere safe, then sneaks them under the tree when everyone is asleep. Ethan nodded again, pretending to be deeply impressed. The inside of his head was politely clapping. Not bad. Vague but serviceable. That makes sense, Ethan said. Logistics must be a nightmare. He let that sit there for a moment, then tilted his head. Does Santa get breaks? His dad frowned. Breaks. Ethan spooned cereal into his mouth, chewed thoughtfully, then continued. Like, does he get to stop for coffee? Halfway around the world he must get tired. Is there like a Santa union that insists on regular hot drink pauses so he does not get frostbite on his feelings? Lily almost choked laughing. Daniel looked genuinely lost now, treading through the snowdrifts of his own story. A union, Ethan shrugged. Just saying, if you fly through several time zones in one night, someone should be making sure you get a snack schedule. Laura hid a smile behind her mug. Her eyes sparkled with quiet chaos. Their dad finally managed a response. He said that Santa manages time differently, that when you have magic you do not need union breaks in the usual way. It was not the answer of a man who had thought this part through. It was the answer of someone trying desperately to stay 3 steps ahead of his own child. Ethan leaned back, letting his expression soften into satisfied belief. On the inside his sarcasm stretched contentedly. Over the next week he took the role even further. He talked about Santa to Lily in the hallway, just loudly enough for his parents to overhear. He described elaborate sleigh parking strategies for city streets. He speculated about how Santa handled apartment blocks with no chimneys and tiny windows. He praised Santa's dedication with almost dramatic admiration. Protecting the bit had become a performance art. At the grocery store, when they passed a whole shelf of milk, Ethan announced that they should choose the kind Santa liked best. The kind that kept him energized all night without upsetting his magical digestion. He looked at his dad with exaggerated earnestness and asked which chop was Santa approved. Daniel picked whichever was on sale and declared it perfect for Santa. At a small Christmas market in the city centre, they passed a person dressed in a Santa suit handing out candy canes. The beard was too long, the boots slightly too small. Ethan stared with wide eyes for exactly as long as necessary, then clutched his dad's sleeve and whispered that maybe this was an undercover helper. The helper Santa waved. Lily waved back with both hands. Their dad watched them both, and for a moment Ethan saw it again. The flicker of something almost like worry in his dad's eyes. Not about Santa, about time, about how long they had left of this version of Christmas, where belief still floated freely around the apartment like dust motes in morning light. That night Ethan lay in bed and replayed his own performance. The whole experimental believer act had been funny. It was hard not to laugh when his dad scrambled to explain imaginary union coffee breaks. But underneath the humour there was something else now. Something a little heavier, like the quiet weight of a winter coat when you first put it on. He thought about the way his dad's shoulders had seemed lighter when Ethan leaned into the Santa story instead of walking away from it. Maybe, Ethan realized, his act was doing more than just confusing his dad. Maybe it was also helping him. Later that week, he got proof. He had come into the living room on a Tuesday evening, pretending to look for a lost sock. Really, he was investigating the mysterious case of the disappearing wrapping paper scraps. He paused in the doorway when he heard his parents talking. Their voices were low, the television only a dim glow in the background. Laura said that she could not believe how big Ethan was getting, and that he would probably stop believing in Santa soon. Daniel sighed. He said that he knew, but he was glad they still had at least this year. He said he was not ready for the part where the kids just wanted gift cards and headphones, and where Santa was just a joke instead of an event. Laura told him that he did not need a red suit to be a good dad. He replied that he knew that, but it helped. That he liked being the one who snuck around at midnight, setting things up so that morning felt magical. He liked being the reason their kids ran out of their rooms with that special kind of joy. Ethan stood very still in the hallway, the lost sock temporarily demoted on his list of priorities. It was strange hearing his dad talk like that. He was so confident at the hardware store, so sure about bolts and screws and how to stop a chair from wobbling. But here, talking about his own children and time and growing up, he sounded almost nervous, like the magic was not just for the kids, it was for him too. That night Ethan made a new rule for himself. He would keep playing. He would keep poking small holes in the logistics just for fun, but he would never punch straight through the story. He would never fling the Santa suit out into the open like evidence in a courtroom. The line between joke and damage was clearer now, so he continued his experimental believer phase, but he adjusted it. Less sharp edges, more amusement. The next morning at breakfast, he asked what Santa's favorite cookie recipe was and whether they had to follow it exactly, or if Santa appreciated creative baking failures. His dad said that Santa loved any cookie that was made with effort. Ethan nodded slowly and said that sounded convenient. Then he smiled, a real small smile that reached his eyes. He still enjoyed watching his dad improvise. He still logged every answer in the quietly growing file in his head. Yet each day it felt less like a mission to expose something, and more like a mission to understand it. It turned out that behind the red suit and the ho-ho-ho there was a man who needed, just as much as anyone, to believe he could still make a room light ape. By the time the middle of December arrived, Ethan's operation had settled into a strange balance. On the outside he was the kid asking question, staring thoughtfully at store Santas, and acting mildly obsessed with reindeer fuel efficiency. On the inside, he was the backstage observer, watching his dad navigate the growing gap between fantasy and reality with a mix of panic and pride. The sarcasm was still there, but it had softened around the edges. It sat side by side with something warmer. He still did not believe in Santa, but he did, in a way he would never admit out loud, believe in his parents. Chapter 4: Cookies, Carrots, and Controlled Chaos. Christmas Eve arrived not with trumpets and choirs, but with the sound of the heating system doing its best, and the quiet clatter of pots in the kitchen. Outside, the sky sat in that particular shade of grey that looked like it could not decide whether it wanted to snow or just be dramatic. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere was its own small storm of activity. Laura stood at the stove, managing an intimidating number of dishes at once. Something bubbled in a pot, something else sizzled in a pan, and the oven light glowed steadily. The whole place smelled like cinnamon, roasted vegetables, and mild stress. Daniel moved around trying to be helpful. He was in charge of setting the table, which meant convincing the cutlery to line up politely and arguing with a roll of paper napkins that did not want to tear neatly. Lily darted through the rooms with the energy of a small satellite, occasionally stopping to rearrange ornaments on the tree. Ethan sat on the sofa with a notebook which he called the Truth Ledger in his head, and pretended to be writing a story for school. In reality, he was making notes for his newest idea. If his parents were going to run the Santa show, he thought, he might as well give them a more complicated script. Nothing cruel, just an upgrade in difficulty. The annual tradition in their home was simple. Before bedtime, they would prepare a plate of cookies and a glass of milk for Santa, plus a carrot for each reindeer. The plate would be placed near the tree. The kids would go to bed. Later, evidence of Santa's visit would appear in the form of crumbs, an empty glass, and reenactment marks from imaginary reindeer teeth. It was a sweet, simple ritual, which made it an excellent target for maintenance. An hour before dinner, Ethan called a family meeting in the living room. Nobody had agreed to this, but he simply announced it with enough confidence that they showed up. He proposed that this year they upgrade the snack offering. He pointed out, in his best serious voice, that after centuries of the same old milk and cookie routine, Santa might appreciate something a bit more specialized. Lily immediately agreed. She took the concept of hospitality very seriously. Their parents were too busy to argue and too entertained to stop him, so Ethan dragged out a sheet of paper from his notebook and began designing what he called the optimal Santa refreshment plan. Item 2, warm milk. Not hot, not cold, but exactly comfortable, so that Santa did not burn his tongue in a rush. Item 2, cookies arranged in a pleasing pattern. Item 3, carrots not whole but sliced neatly into rounds and then stacked into a small tower, in case the reindeer wanted a more refined dining experience. He even suggested adding a small note for Santa with clear instructions. He wrote in his careful handwriting that the milk had been warmed for precisely the correct number of seconds in the microwave, that the cookies were organized from least to most chocolate, and that the carrot tower was a structural experiment but completely safe to eat. When he was done, the snack setup looked less like a plate and more like an installation at a very specific seasonal art gallery. His parents watched all of this with expressions that hovered between amusement and resignation. Laura murmured that Santa was becoming more demanding every year. Daniel replied that Santa was very grateful for the attention to detail. Ethan hid a smile and added another line to his internal report. After dinner, which featured only a few minor oven incidents, they moved to the living room for presents from relatives, board games, and the traditional debate about whether anyone actually liked the taste of that specific holiday dessert that appeared every year out of obligation. The fairy lights on the tree glowed softly. The television played some holiday program in the background with the sound turned low. Outside, the first flakes of real snow finally decided to show up, drifting past the window in a way that would look fake if anyone tried to recreate it on screen. Later, as bedtime crept closer, snack time arrived. The plate was placed near the tree, the note was propped up carefully. The milk was warmed to what Ethan declared was optimal sleigh steering temperature. The carrot tower stood proudly, slightly leaning but determined. Lily stared at it with wide eyes. She asked whether the reindeer would know not to knock it over. Ethan said that reindeer were highly trained in delicate snack situations. Their parents said nothing, but their eyes were laughing. Then came the usual sequence: pajamas, teeth, Lily bouncing back into the living room twice to make sure the plate was still there and the note had not fallen over, lights dimming. Eventually the apartment settled. The city outside quieted into that late-night hush where the usual sounds were softened and stretched, like everything was wrapped in thick fabric. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the faint light creeping under his door. He could hear the familiar patterns of Christmas Eve movement, kitchen sounds, the clink of dishes, the low murmur of his parents' voices. He waited. Eventually the floorboard outside his room creaked. His door stayed closed, but he knew the Santa suit was on the move. He slid quietly out of bed and walked to his door, opening it just enough to leave a thin gap. The hallway beyond glowed faintly with light from the living room. He positioned himself so that he could see but not be seen. Years of sibling stealth had taught him exactly where to stand. In the living room, the scene unfolded like a private theatre performance. His dad stood near the tree, wearing the red suit with the kind of solemn concentration usually reserved for building flat-pack furniture. The fake beard sat slightly crooked on his face. The belt was cinched tight, perhaps in retaliation for its earlier disappearance. His mum sat on the sofa, holding a mug and watching, eyebrows raised just enough to suggest that this was both adorable and a little absurd. Daniel looked at the plate like it was an exam he had not studied for. There was the warmed milk, steaming gently. The cookies arranged in a pattern that might have a secret meaning. The carrot tower, leaning like it was auditioning for a famous building in Italy. He bent down slowly. Ethan saw him pick up the note and read it. His father's face went through several stages: mild confusion, amusement, a brief quiet appreciation for his son's commitment to the bit, then a resigned acceptance that he would actually have to interact with this new snack system. Santa, in full costume, took a careful sip of the milk. He winced a little, like it was hotter than the optimal temperature described in the note, but he drank anyway. The costume left no room for half measures. He took a bite from one of the cookies, then intentionally left crumbs arranged in what he probably hoped looked casual, but actually resembled a crime scene for a dessert. The real challenge, however, was the carrot tower. He picked up part of the slices and looked at the leaning structure. For a moment, Santa seemed genuinely concerned about causing structural collapse. Then he committed, took another piece, and the whole tower listed to one side and gently collapsed. From Ethan's angle in the hallway, it was all incredible. There was something weirdly epic about watching a grown man in a red suit try not to destroy a carrot sculpture prepared by his children. His mum covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Daniel straightened up, brushed imaginary crumbs from his suit, and looked around the room, as if checking whether any invisible audience had opinions. He then moved to the tree, placed a few presents from their hiding place into view, and did a quiet ho-ho-ho that sounded like someone carefully checking a box on a list. Then he spoke, in a low voice that was half Santa and half his usual self. He said that the kids really went all out this year. Laura answered softly that maybe one of them was getting suspiciously detailed about Santa habits. He replied that he knew that, but he was not ready to stop. Not yet. Standing there in the hallway gap, Ethan felt a strange wave of emotion. On the surface, this was hilarious. His dad taking the carrot tower so seriously, his mum trying not to laugh, the effort, the commitment, the quiet absurdity of the whole operation. Underneath, there was something else. He was not watching a magical creature visiting his home. He was watching two very human people working very hard to build something soft around their children. Something warm and glowing and safe, at least for a few hours. He realized that this might be one of the most grown-up things he had ever seen. Two adults, both tired from work and life and probably the price of groceries, still bending themselves into a story just so their children could wake up to a little extra wonder. He felt bigger and smaller at the same time. Ethan slipped back into his room before his dad turned around. He climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and stared at the faint fairy light reflections flickering on his wall. He tried to imagine what it felt like, being his dad in that suit, standing in a quiet living room knowing your kids were pretending to be asleep down the hall, holding a carrot slice and deciding whether to eat it on behalf of imaginary reindeer, choosing to believe even for a second that this performance mattered. He realized something important. Watch it from the shadows was, in its own way, a kind of magic. When he had been younger, he had just woken up and found things. Presents under the tree, cookie crumbs, an empty glass, the evidence of a story. Now he saw the work behind the evidence. The hands that moved things, the decisions made at midnight, the whispered consultations about whether the kids would like a particular toy. The magic had not disappeared when he learned the truth, it had moved. It was not in the flying sleigh or the mysterious chimney physics. It was in the way his parents kept trying, year after year, to make December feel different from the rest of the calendar. The next morning, Lily ran into his room at what appeared to be sunrise but might as well have been the middle of the night. She shouted that Santa had come. He pretended to wake slowly, rubbing his eyes, playing his part. They rushed to the living room together. The plate was there, the milk glass was mostly empty. Crumbs littered the plate. The carrot tower was dramatically collapsed, as if reindeer had hosted a tiny party. Lily gasped like she had just witnessed proof of a miracle. Ethan let himself be swept along. He inspected the crumbs, nodded seriously at the carrot remains, and announced that clearly the reindeer had been impressed with the structural engineering. His parents watched from the doorway, eyes soft, smiles genuine. Later, while Lily was busy tearing into wrapping paper and narrating each reveal at full volume, Ethan caught his dad's eye, just for a moment. He let a small, knowing smile slip through, not enough for Lily to notice, just enough for Daniel to see that something had changed. In that single glance, Ethan said, "I see you in the suit now." His dad blinked, then smiled back, a little sheepishly, a little proudly. The day rolled forward in a blur of boxes, batteries, slightly undercooked stuffing, and family chaos. At some point, the Santa suit disappeared back into the wardrobe. The carrot evidence was cleaned away. The truth ledger gained a few more invisible pages. That night, when the house was finally quiet again, Ethan lay awake for a few extra minutes. He thought about Santa. Not the one with the flying sleigh and perfect beard, but the collection of small, tired grown-ups across the city, all bending over plates and trees and stockings, adding crumbs and rearranging presents at unreasonable hours. He thought about his own private backstage view, and he realized that the show, knowing what he knew now, was even better from this angle. Chapter 5. The Night Santa Met Santa. By the time the next Christmas season rolled around, Ethan was officially 9 years old and unofficially much older in Santa years. The truth ledger in his head had grown thick. The Santa suit in the wardrobe had become a familiar resident. His dad's ho-ho-ho had not really improved, but it had become strangely endearing. Snow came late that year. The city spent most of December looking like it had dressed for autumn and then forgotten to change. There were still fairy lights in windows, still plastic reindeer on balconies, but the ground below them remained stubbornly bare. Inside the apartment, however, it might as well have been in the middle of a snowstorm. Christmas had arrived indoors. Laura had filled the place with strings of lights, candles, and the gentle smell of baking that clung to the curtains. Daniel had brought home a tree that was technically the right size for the room if No made any sudden movements. Lily had doubled down on her belief system and was currently writing what she proudly called her revised Santa letter. Ethan watched all of this with his usual calm interest, but underneath, a new plan had started to form. He had spent years watching his dad sneak around in the red suit. He had studied the wardrobe operations, he had questioned the logistics from every angle. At some point, observation was simply not enough. It was time for something bigger, something memorable, something like Santa meeting Santa. The idea arrived one afternoon when he was sitting on the living room floor helping Lily sort ornaments. She was explaining, in great detail, which baubles were allowed to hang next to each other to avoid what she called color arguments. Down the hallway, the wardrobe door in his parents' bedroom creaked softly as his dad retrieved something. Ethan knew that sound by now, the muffled scrape of hangers and the quiet thud of a shoebox. The Christmas supply center was open. He glanced toward the bedroom, then back at the tree, then at his sister, who was currently negotiating a peace treaty between a gold star and a silver snowflake. He thought, very calmly, that it would be deeply entertaining if his dad, dressed as Santa, walked into the living room to find Santa already there. The more he sat with that mental image, the better it became. Of course, there were rules. He would not make fun of his dad in a cruel way. He would not scare Lily. The point was not to destroy the show. The point was to improvise an unexpected scene into it. That night, while everyone slept, Ethan lay awake planning. If the pattern held, his dad would suit up sometime after the children were supposedly asleep. He would get the presents from their hiding place, set them around the tree, nibble on whatever plate of snacks had been arranged, and then retreat. That was the rhythm. Ethan's plan required him to get to the suit before that, to stage his own Santa appearance while his dad was still just a man in a sweater, not yet in character. It would require timing, stealth, calm. He felt oddly ready. Christmas Eve finally arrived, calm and crisp. The sky outside was clear and cold now, the air sharp enough to make your breath look like smoke. No snow, but plenty of winter mood. Dinner was its usual blend of careful cooking and mild chaos. Lily spent most of the evening vibrating from sugar and anticipation. She kept peeking down the hallway like she expected to catch Santa doing a rehearsal. After the traditional snack arrangement for Santa and the reindeer, after the last show on television, after the last reminder to brush teeth properly, the kids were sent to bed. Lily fell asleep quickly, exhausted by her own excitement. Ethan did not. He waited. He had put his everyday clothes back on under his pajamas just in case. It was not the most comfortable choice, but he had accepted it as part of the mission. The apartment slowly settled into that familiar holiday night quiet. Voices in the living room faded, doors opened and closed. At some point he heard the wardrobe gently creak open down the hallway. That was his signal. Moving carefully, he slipped out of his room and padded toward his parents' doorway. The light from their bedside lamp cast a soft glow across the hall. He paused just outside, listened, and then moved quickly. The room was empty. The wardrobe stood half open, a row of shirts and jackets pushed aside. There, in all its slightly wrinkled glory, hung the Santa suit. The boots sat on the floor, the beard dangled from a hook. The belt was draped across the hanger as usual. Ethan's heart beat a little faster. He stepped inside, closed the bedroom door almost fully, leaving only a thin line of light from the hallway. Then he approached the wardrobe like someone greeting an old character in a long-running series. Putting on the suit was harder than he had expected. The jacket was too big, the sleeves covering his hands. The trousers nearly swallowed his feet, even with the boots on. He had to fold the waistband twice and tighten the belt to its last hole to keep everything from sliding right off. The beard, when he tried to hook it over his ears, drooped halfway down his chest. He pushed it up, adjusted the elastic, decided that dignity was optional, and carried on. When he finally looked at himself in the mirror on the wardrobe door, he almost laughed out loud. He looked like what would happen if someone tried to shrink Santa in the wash and stopped halfway. He took a deep breath. The absurdity of the image was half the point. From the living room came the clink of something glass, the quiet rust of wrapping paper. His dad was in position. Ethan opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, boots thumping a little on the floorboards. He moved at a steady pace, not too slow, not too fast, letting the soft jingling of the belt buckle announce his presence. When he reached the living room doorway, he stopped. Daniel stood near the tree in his regular clothes, holding a roll of tape. He was mid-crouch, trying to secure a piece of wrapping paper that had decided to revolt. He froze. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. The room was lit only by the tree lights and one lamp casting everything in soft gold. Ethan could see his dad's brain working in real time, man in sweater, kids in bed, Santa suit in the wardrobe, Santa suit now walking into the room under its own power. Ethan watched his dad's face go through several stages, surprise, confusion. A swift calculation trying to determine whether he was dreaming. Finally, Daniel straightened slowly. He looked at his son, who currently resembled a much smaller, somewhat lopsided Santa. Ethan felt the urge to laugh, but he pushed it down. He had chosen to commit to it, and commit he would. In his deepest voice, which was not very deep but tried its best, he spoke. He said, very calmly, that it looked like someone had started the present delivery early. His dad blinked. The tape in his hand dangled helplessly. The silence between them stretched into something fragile and ridiculous at the same time. Then Daniel did something Ethan did not fully expect. He went along with it. He cleared his throat and replied that he was, of course, one of Santa's helpers. That he was just arranging the gifts to Santa's exact standards before Santa himself arrived. Ethan folded his arms over the oversized red jacket. The sleeves flopped. He tilted his head and said that it was interesting, because he was under the impression that he was Santa tonight. His dad's mouth twitched. There was amusement there, and something else too, a kind of relief, as if, now that the story had cracked open a little, it felt good to breathe different air. They stood like that for a moment, in a strange new territory where both of them were pretending to be someone else while also clearly recognizing each other. Ethan decided to push the scene step further. He walked, with exaggerated care, to the snack plate. He picked up a cookie, nibbled it thoughtfully through the big beard, and announced that the quality control was acceptable. He also said that the carrot arrangement showed promising creativity. His dad actually laughed. A real laugh, soft and surprised. Then Daniel, still in his regular clothes, gave a small half bow to the smaller Santa and said that he was honored to assist. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the thick jacket. For a few minutes they moved around the living room together, Wen in a red suit too big, Wen in a sweater too ordinary, both carrying presents and setting them carefully near the tree. It felt like a rehearsal for some future truth, where they would both remember that time when the story bent in a new way but did not break. After a while, Ethan sensed that the moment had reached its natural limit. If he stayed too long, Lily might wake up. The joke would collapse under its own weight. So he gave a slow, dramatic nod, thanked his dad for being such a dedicated helper, and announced that he needed to check on the sleigh. There were always parking issues on Christmas Eve, he said. His dad nodded back, eyes bright. He replied that of course the sleigh came first. Parking tickets could ruin the magic. Ethan walked back down the hallway, boots slightly too heavy, suit slightly too big, heart feeling exactly the right size. In the bedroom, he carefully peeled off the beard, the jacket, the trousers, the boots. He rehung everything with precision, aligning the hanger and smoothing the sleeves. The suit resumed its usual position, as if nothing had happened. He changed back into his pajamas and slid into bed, the events of the last few minutes circling through his mind like snowflakes. For years he had watched his dad perform as Santa. Tonight he had reversed the roles. For a brief, ridiculous moment his dad had been the helper, and he had been the myth. He did not feel guilty. He did not feel like he had taken something away. If anything, it felt like he had shared something. He saw in his dad's half laugh and half bewilderment a kind of quiet joy, a recognition that the Santa story was not just a one-direction performance anymore. It was turning into something shared, flexible, slightly bent but still shining. The next morning, nothing was said directly. Lily burst into his room at sunrise, convinced that Santa had definitely been there. The snacks were eaten, the presents were perfectly placed, the room smelled faintly of wrapping paper and happiness. His parents watched them tear open gifts, their own faces a mix of tired and delighted. At then point, while Lily was busy showing off a new toy, Ethan caught his dad's eye again. This time, there was no questioning look. Only a small, knowing smile and a very subtle nod. They both remembered. The night Santa met Santa had entered their private family history, tucked quietly between the usual traditions. Chapter 6. The Crisis of the Almost Confession. January arrived like it always did. The fairy lights came down, the tree left a trail of needles all the way to the stairwell. The decorations went back into their boxes, which claimed they would be easy to store and then absolutely were not. The Santa suit returned to its off-season life in the wardrobe, the beard tucked away, the belt coiled like a sleeping snake. Outside, the weather could not decide what it wanted. Some days the city was wet and grey, the sidewalks shiny with rain. Other days the air turned sharp again and frost tried half-heartedly to decorate windshields. Inside the apartment the heat still clicked on and off. The television showed regular programs again, and the sound of wrapping paper was replaced with the sound of school bags being dragged toward the door. Christmas was officially over, but something lingered. For Ethan, it was the memory of that moment in the living room when he had stood in the Santa suit and watched his dad scramble to adjust to a whole new script. The joke had been fun, yes, but the look in his dad's eyes afterward had stuck with him. Some kind of bridge had been built between them that night, invisible but sturdy. Life flowed on, school resumed, homework returned with all the charm of a broken alarm clock. The truth ledger in Ethan's head stopped collecting Santa data for a while, and returned to its usual mix of mundane observations. Then, one evening in late January, he happened to overhear something that shifted the ground again. He was in the hallway, sitting on the floor with a science book open in front of him. The book wanted him to be interested in rock types. His brain wanted to nap. His parents were in the living room talking in that low voice adults used when they thought there were topics children did not need to hear yet. He did not mean to eavesdrop. He did not exactly mean not to, either. He was simply there, the wall was thin, and the words came through. Laura said that maybe next Christmas would be the time to tell Ethan the truth about Santa. There was a pause. Then his dad sighed, the kind of sigh that carried more than one thought in it. Daniel said he guessed they should. He said he could not exactly expect Ethan to believe forever, and that their son was already asking suspiciously detailed questions. His voice was half amused and half reluctant. He added quietly that he still did not want it to end. Not yet. Laura replied that it would not really end. It would change. That once kids knew the truth, they could join the grown-up side of the story, help keep it alive for the younger ones. Daniel said he knew that in theory, but it was not the same as hearing those words come out of his kid's mouth. Hearing, "I know, Dad." The room on the other side of the wall went quiet for a moment. Ethan stared at the diagram of a volcano in his book and did not see it at all. His chest felt oddly tight. He had imagined many times what it would be like if his parents finally told him the truth. Sometimes, in those private daydreams, he pictured themselves dramatically confessing and him casually saying that he had known for years. Other times he imagined pretending to be shocked and doing a very convincing performance. Now that he heard them planning the conversation, none of those versions felt right. He did not want to see his dad's face when he tried to say the words. He did not want to watch his mum manage the moment like some emotional traffic controller, making sure everyone got through safely. He especially did not want to sit there pretending this was news. It would turn something that had become quietly beautiful into something vaguely awkward. He closed the book and leaned his head back against the wall. The paint felt cool. The voices in the other room softened again. Laura said that they did not need to decide now, that they had months before the next Christmas, that life was exhausting enough 1 week at a time. Daniel agreed. He said they would think about it. After a while, the conversation drifted to something else. Work schedules, bills, an email someone forgot to send, the usual constellation of adult concerns. Ethan remained in the hallway, the crisis circling in his mind. On the hand, he was tired of pretending to believe. On the other hand, he did not want to watch his dad retire from the Santa role like someone turning in a beloved costume for the last time. The next day, he stood in front of the wardrobe and looked at the closed doors. Behind them hung the suit, off-duty but still there. He imagined his dad taking it out one last time, knowing he would never wear it for real again. Maybe debt for jokes or for some future younger cousin, but not in the same way. Not as the invisible magician of their small apartment, made his stomach twist in a way he did not like. That evening he found himself in the kitchen alone with his mom. She was making tea, the kettle humming, the light over the sink casting a small warm circle on the counter. He sat at the table, spinning a spoon slowly between his fingers. Laura glanced over at him. She asked how school was, in that tone parents used that meant they were ready for any answer from fine to the building caught fire. He said it was fine. Then after a pause he added that he liked Christmas more now than he did when he was younger. She raised an eyebrow, half amused. "That is not something you hear every day," she said. "Usually kids your age start acting like they are too cool for it." Ethan shrugged. "I like seeing how much effort goes into it," he said. "The cooking and the planning and all that." Her expression shifted, softening in a way he did not see often. She asked, very gently, whether he felt like Christmas was still magical. That word hung in the air between them. Magical. He thought about the Santa suit, the carrot tower, the look on his dad's face when the small Santa had walked into the living room. He thought about the late-night wrapping, the way his parents' hands had moved through tissue paper and tape, building a morning that looked effortless. He thought about Lily's laughter and the way the apartment smelled like baking and pine, even when the real world outside was exhausted and grey. He answered carefully. He said that it felt magical in a different way now, less like a mystery and more like watching something beautiful being built right in front of him. His mum studied him for a moment, clearly hearing more in his words than he said out loud. She smiled, a little sadly, a little proudly. She said that was a very grown-up way of looking at it. He took a breath. For a second it sat on the tip of his tongue to say it, to spill everything, to tell her about the letter he had found years ago, the suit in the wardrobe, the overheard whispers, the night Santa met Santa, to tell her that he knew, that he had known for a long time. But then he saw the faint lines of tiredness around her eyes, the way her shoulders drooped slightly, like she was carrying more than just grocery bags these days. He thought about his dad in the living room, probably staring at the blank television screen, thinking about work and rent and whatever else. Grown-ups quietly wrestled with when they thought no one could see. He let the confession slide away. Instead, he said that the best part of Christmas now was watching other people light toke. It sounded like a strange thing for someone his age to say, but it was true. His mum, hearing that, looked at him with something like surprise and something like pride. She said that was a pretty special way to feel. That night, alone in his room, Ethan stared at the ceiling and played out different futures. In Nen version, his parents sat him down next December and told him the truth. He pretended to be shocked. They looked relieved and a little heartbroken. Everyone moved on. In another version, he confessed first. He told them he had known for years. They laughed, maybe, and demanded details. His dad might be embarrassed and amused at the same time. His mum might roll her eyes at all the times they had stayed up late being careful for absolutely no reason. Both versions felt incomplete. There was a third option, he realized. He could quietly manage the transition himself. He did not have to make a dramatic announcement. He did not need a big scene. He could simply keep doing what he had been doing, but with a little more intention. He could keep Lily believing for as long as she needed to. He could keep acting surprised in it's the right way to make his parents feel like their efforts still landed. He could be the bridge between the world where Santa was a mystery and the world where Santa was a shared joke. The thought calmed him. The crisis, he realized, was not really about Santa at all. It was about watching his parents prepare to say goodbye to a version of themselves, the ones who ran around at midnight with nerves and fairy lights. Maybe, he thought, he could give them just a little more time in that role. Weeks turned into months. Snow finally came and then melted. School projects appeared and disappeared. The Santa suit stayed in the wardrobe, patient. Life was ordinary again, yet underneath the ordinary there was a quiet plan taking shape. Next Christmas, Ethan decided, he would let them talk if they really needed to. He would listen kindly, he would say it was all right. But if he could help it, he would ease them into it. He would answer their almost confession with a half-confession of his own. He would not say I have known everything for years, in a way that made their efforts feel pointless. He would say something closer to, I kind of figured it out, and I loved watching you try. The truth, he thought, deserved to land gently. Chapter 7. Lily and the Emergency of Belief. By the time Ethan turned 10, the Santa situation in their apartment had settled into a strange, almost comfortable balance. He knew, his parents knew, that he probably knew. No one said anything. It was like everyone was politely ignoring an extra chair at the table that no one sat in. Lily, however, still believed with the full force of her small, determined heart. She was around 7 now, stuck in that perfect age where magic and fact sat side by side and never argued. She still wrote letters to Santa with careful block letters. She still debated reindeer aerodynamics over breakfast. She still adjusted the ornaments on the tree like she was managing a tiny diplomatic summit between glittering nations. Ethan had quietly taken on the role of belief bodyguard. He did not correct her. He did not roll his eyes. He also did not feed her wild stories that would be painful to let go of later. He stuck to the middle ground, that strange place where stories were treated as valuable, even if you knew how they worked. Then school decided to interfere. It happened on a grey Tuesday afternoon in early December. The sky outside the classroom looked the same as the walls inside it, and everyone seemed vaguely tired. Ethan was in his own classroom across the building, trying to stay awake during a lesson about fractions. Lily, in her younger grade, was in a different classroom where, as it turned out, a small emotional storm was brewing. Older siblings, Ethan would later decide, are responsible for picking up the pieces when primary school realism hits. He was in the hallway at the end of the day when he saw her. Children poured out of classrooms in a wave of backpacks and winter coats. The noise level rose to that special frequency only schools can produce. Amid the chaos, Lily emerged, clutching her bag with both hands, her face pale in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Her teacher said goodbye. Lily did not seem to hear. She walked toward Ethan in a straight line, eyes wide and shiny. He immediately felt that quiet alertness that comes when something is wrong, but no one has said it yet. "Hey," he said softly. She stopped in front of him, took a shaky breath, and announced in a small, wrecked voice that some kids in her class had said Santa was not real. There it was, the emergency. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the hallway, away from the daily stampede. Coats brushed past them, shoes squeaked, doors slammed, and felt like they were standing in the eye of a very small storm. "Who said that?" he asked. "To buy a little time?" She sniffed and named a couple of classmates. She said they had laughed at her for talking about Santa and reindeer. They had said it was all just parents and presents from stores, and that anyone who still believed was being a baby. The word baby hit harder than the rest. He could hear it in her voice. Ethan felt a flare of irritation at these unknown small destroyers of carefully built magic. It was not dramatic anger, more a solid, unamused dislike. He considered his options. He could tell her the full truth. He could say it is all made up, and welcome to the backstage crew. But looking at her face, he knew that would not be truth. Not yet, net for her. He could lie and say those kids were absolutely wrong and Santa was absolutely real in every literal way, but that felt thin, brittle, like something that would shatter the moment she looked at it too hard. He needed a third way. So he breathed in slowly and did what older brothers sometimes unintentionally train for. He improvised. "You know how stories work," he said quietly. She frowned, confused. He asked her whether she remembered how they used to play with stuffed animals and make them talk to each other. "Of course," she said. "That was serious art." He nodded. Back then, when she made them talk, she had known it was her voice. But did that mean the stories were not real? She hesitated. "No," she said slowly. "They were still real." "Exactly," he replied. He told her that sometimes stories are real because people decide to keep them alive together. That Santa was wed of those stories. He said that maybe the exact details were different for every family. Maybe in some homes Santa was a magical person with a sleigh. Maybe in others Santa was a team effort with parents and grandparents and tired uncles all throwing in wrapping paper and tape. He said that the important part was what the story did, not the mechanics of how the presents got under the tree. Lily listened, forehead creased. "So is Santa real or not?" she asked, sounding like someone trying to solve a math problem with missing numbers. Ethan thought about their dad in the Santa suit, about their mum holding a mug and trying not to laugh, about carrot towers and midnight whispering. He answered carefully. He said that Santa was real in the way feelings are real. You cannot see them walking down the street, but you know when they are there. He said that every time someone stayed up late wrapping presents to make a morning feel special, that was Santa. Every time someone wrote on a tag from Santa and tried to draw a beard in the corner, that was Santa. Every time people gathered around a tree and felt that odd mixture of tired and hopeful, that was Santa too. He watched the idea land. "So those kids were wrong?" she asked, wiping her cheeks on her sleeve. He said they were not exactly wrong, but they were also not exactly right. He said maybe they had only seen the surface part of the story and decided that was all there was. He told her that she did not need to believe their version if it did not feel right to her. She could believe in the bigger version. the one where Santa was a name for a whole bunch of good things people did for each other in December. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly relaxed. "That means," she said, "that Santa can be lots of people." He nodded. "That means no one can really cancel him just by saying he is not real." A small fierce look appeared on her face, the kind she got when someone tried to move her favorite ornament without permission. "I like our Santa better," she announced. He smiled. "Me too." On the walk home, she slipped her hand into his without thinking about it. The city streets were damp and cold, the air smelled like traffic and distant chimney smoke, and the sky looked like it was considering snow again. When they reached the apartment, Lily walked in with that serious determination she sometimes had. Their parents glanced up from the kitchen. She declared that some kids at school had said Santa was not real, but that they were confused. Her parents froze for a second, exchanging one of those rapid looks over her head that translated to, "Is this it? Is this the moment?" Before they could say anything, Lily continued. She explained, in her own words, that Santa was real as long as people kept doing Santa things, that he was less a person and more a team effort. She explained that some people did not understand how stories worked, but she did now. Then she asked what they were having for dinner. Crisis over. Ethan watched their parents' faces soften with relief. Laura mouthed a silent thank you in his direction when Lily was not looking. Daniel just looked at him for a moment with a mixture of surprise and quiet pride, as if he had just seen his son perform an unexpectedly difficult trick with no rehearsal. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan quietly put a small plan into action. He had noticed earlier in the week that there was a simple bracelet she had really liked in a shop window near school. Nothing fancy, just a small charm on a thin band, the kind of thing a kid might treat like treasure. He had used some of his saved-up allowance to buy it, hiding it in the back of his drawer. Now he took it out, held it for a moment, then went to the living room. He placed it inside a small envelope he found in the desk, wrote Lily on the front, and then, after a brief pause, added "from Santa" in smaller letters below. He tucked the envelope under her pillow while she slept, moving slow, breathing quiet, feeling very much like he was sneaking into his own version of the legend. In the morning, her shout of surprise was loud enough to make the radiator rattle. She burst into the kitchen waving the bracelet. "Santa left something extra," she said, eyes shining. "He wanted to say thanks for believing the right way." Their parents stared at the bracelet, then at Ethan, then back at the bracelet. No one said anything. But later, when Lily was out of the room, Laura looked at Ethan and asked softly if he had arranged the extra gift. He shrugged. "Maybe Santa had some help," he said. Daniel smiled, that slow, proud smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside his chest. In that moment, Ethan realized something quietly huge. He was not just protecting Lily's belief anymore. He was participating in it. He had moved, almost without noticing, from audience to crew. Chapter 8. The Great Almost Reveal. The next Christmas moved toward them with the steady determination of a calendar that refused to slow down for anyone. By the time December rolled in again, Ethan was edging toward 11. He was taller, his sarcasm was sharper, and his ability to fake surprise had become almost professional. The Santa suit, when it came out of the wardrobe, did not feel like a mystery or even just a costume anymore. It felt like a family artifact, a shared uniform in a very specific yearly project. Lily's belief had shifted into a new shape. After the school incident and the hallway talk, she seemed less worried about whether Santa was literally real and more interested in what she called Santa-style behavior. She left small notes around the apartment that said things like, "extra Santa points for whoever empties the dishwasher." She cheered when her parents wrapped gifts for other relatives. She declared that they were doing Santa work and that it counted. The story had evolved, but it was still alive. For Ethan, the real weight of this particular December was not in the suit or the snacks or even the secret gifts. It was in the memory of that overheard conversation months earlier. the one where his parents had wondered if it was time to tell him the truth. He carried that memory into the season like an extra invisible present, wrapped tight. He could feel it in small ways, the way his dad watched him a little longer whenever someone mentioned Santa, the way his mum paused an extra second before signing a gift tag, the way they both seemed to hover sometimes as if waiting for him to ask a certain question. He did not. But Christmas Eve had a way of bringing unfinished things to the surface. That night, the apartment was its usual combination of cozy and chaotic. Dinner had been loud and slightly overcooked, and perfect in the way imperfect things can be when the right people are present. After dishes and a round of board games that nearly derailed over a rule argument, Lily eventually drifted towards sleep, worn out by excitement and sugar. She was tucked into bed with promises that Santa duties would be fully respected in her absence. The house quieted. The living room, lit only by the tree and a lamp, looked like a painting someone had painted after a long day. Wrapping paper lay in a half-folded pile, gift bags waited in a corner, the snack plate stood ready with cookies and a carefully measured glass of milk. Ethan lingered in the hallway, sensing that something was different this time. His parents sat on the sofa together, not yet reaching for the suit or the presents. The television was off. The room felt full of unsaid things. Laura broke the silence first. She said, quietly, that it might be time to talk to Ethan. Daniel nodded slowly. He agreed. His voice sounded steady, but his hands were clasped tightly together, fingers interlocked. Ethan, standing in the shadow of the hallway, closed his eyes for a second. He had seen this moment coming, but that did not make it easier. He stepped into the room before they could start whispering strategies. "Hey," he said, trying to keep his tone light. They both looked up, startled. His mum gave a small smile. His dad straightened, as if bracing for a conversation he had practiced but never actually had. "Should you not be in bed?" Daniel asked, falling back on the safest line in the parental script. Ethan shrugged. "Hard to sleep when there is so much Santa logistics happening," he said. The word logistics made both his parents flinch just a little. Laura patted the spot on the sofa between them. "Come sit for a minute," she said. He did. The cushions dipped under his weight, and the three of them sat there, held in a quiet triangle of shared history and unspoken suspicions. The tree lights blinked lazily in the corner. Somewhere in the building a neighbor laughed at something on television. His dad cleared his throat. "Ethan," he began, "there is something we should probably talk about." Here it was. The great reveal. The unveiling of the truth that had been quietly living in Ethan's mind for years. Except now, with both of them looking at him with that combination of concern and love, it felt less like a reveal and more like a delicate object that needed to be handled carefully. He could let them give their practiced speech. He could nod, pretend to be a little surprised and tell them he understood. Or he could save them from that awkward climb. He chose the second. "I know," he said gently. His dad blinked. "Know what about Santa?" Ethan replied. "The truth." Laura inhaled sharply, then exhaled as if she had been holding that breath since last December. His dad sat back, eyes searching Ethan's face. For a moment he looked almost lost. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. Ethan thought about saying since the wrapping paper in the sock drawer years ago, but that felt too sharp. Instead he answered in a softer way. "A while," he said. "Little things. Wrapping paper, your voice, the suit." He let a small smile slip in. "The sleigh parking issues." Laura gave a breathy little laugh. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face. "And you never said anything?" Ethan shook his head. "I liked watching you do it," he said. "You both looked like you were having fun." His dad stared at him for a long moment, then something in his expression cracked. Not in a painful way, more like ice thawing. "I was so worried you would feel betrayed," he said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "I get it now," he replied. "It is not lying to be mean. It is lying to make something nicer. That is not the worst kind." His mum reached out and squeezed his hand. She asked if he was angry. He shook his head again. "No," he said. "Honestly, seeing how much work you put into it made me like it more." He hesitated, then added, "I liked having the backstage pass." His dad huffed a surprised laugh. Backstage pass, he repeated. Ethan nodded. Getting to watch the show from a different angle. There was a pause. The tension that had been collecting in the room for months leaked out slowly, like air from a balloon that no one had the heart to pop. Daniel leaned back, shoulders loosening. He admitted, in a voice that wobbled just a little, that being Santa had helped him feel like he was doing something right when life felt messy and small. He said that sneaking around at night, arranging presents and eating slightly stale cookies made him feel like he could fix something, even if it was just a morning. Ethan listened, something in his chest tightening. He realized that for his dad, the Santa role had never really been about the myth. It had been about having a job to do that made his kids happy. A clear mission in a world where most missions were confusing and underpaid. "I get that," Ethan said quietly. His dad looked at him. "Do you?" Ethan nodded. "It is like when I helped with the bracelet for Lily," he said. "It felt good knowing she would wake up and find it." His parents both stared. "You did that?" Laura asked. He nodded again. "Yeah, I wanted her to have something extra, Santa style." She shook her head slowly, eyes bright. "That was really kind," she said. The room warmed even though the thermostat had not budged. So, his dad said after a moment, now what Ethan knew what he meant. Now that the truth was out in the open, what happened to the suit, the snacks, the late-night whispering, the whole carefully maintained operation? "We keep it," Ethan said. Both parents looked at him. He shrugged. "Just because I know how it works does not mean we have to stop doing it." He pointed toward the hallway. "Besides, Lily still loves the whole thing, and she has this whole Santa team theory now. We can work with that." His mum smiled. "Santa team theory," she echoed. Ethan nodded. "Think of it this way. Before, you two were the only ones on the night shift. Now you have another team member." His dad laughed. "You want in on the planning?" "Already in," Ethan said. He told them about the tiny adjustments he had made to the suit, the belt relocation, the swapped boots, the carrot tower. He left out nothing this time, and as he spoke, his parents went from horrified to amused to impressed. "You little chaos agent," his mom said, shaking her head. His dad wiped at his eyes, laughing so hard he had to lean forward. "The carrot tower," he repeated. "I remember trying not to knock that thing over." Ethan grinned. That was a good night. The confession, which could have been painful, turned into a shared highlight reel. They talked through old Christmases, comparing what each person had known and guessed and misunderstood. They mapped out how the story had evolved like some strange glitter-flavored family project. At some point, the Santa suit came up. His dad looked toward the bedroom and said softly that maybe he would not wear it much longer. Ethan frowned. "Why not because you are getting older?" Daniel replied. "I thought once you knew for sure, the magic would be gone." Ethan shook his head. He told his dad honestly that seeing him in the suit, knowing what he knew now, felt different but not worse. Before, it had been about the illusion. Now it was about the effort. He said that when he saw his dad in the suit these days, he did not think, "Look, a magical being." He thought, "Look, my dad is really try." And that, he added, felt pretty magical in its own way. For a second the room went very quiet. Then his dad smiled slowly, a little shyly. "All right," he said. "Maybe the suit stays a while longer." They spent the next few minutes making a new plan. From now on, Santa duties would be a cooperative mission. His parents would still handle the main operations. Ethan would assist. He would help hide presents, set up the tree, and arrange snacks. He would also be in charge of cousin gifts when the extended family came over, since he now had proven experience in Santa-style behavior. The conversation wound down. The tension that had been hovering around them for months felt finally folded up and stored away, like a decoration that had served its time and could rest. After a while, Laura stood and stretched. She reminded them that there was still actual work to do before morning. The presents were not going to walk under the tree by themselves. Ethan hopped up, feeling lighter. He reached for a stack of wrap boxes while his dad went to get the suit from the wardrobe. The familiar red fabric appeared in the doorway a moment later, looking less like a secret and more like an old friend. "You still going to wear it tonight?" Ethan asked. unable to hide the hopeful note in his voice. His dad nodded. "I have an assistant now," he said. "Got to look professional." So, while his mum arranged things on the couch and checked tags, father and son disappeared into the bedroom for a moment. When they re-emerged, Daniel wore the full Santa uniform, slightly wrinkled but dignified. Ethan wore the hat, tilted just enough to suggest he was in training. They shared a quick, ridiculous salute, then they got to work. Later, lying in bed, Ethan listened to the faint sounds of Santa operations drifting through the apartment. He no longer needed to peek through doors to feel included. The secret was out. The story was shared. The magic, strange and ordinary all at once, was still very much alive. Chapter 9. The Last Secret Santa Shift. The year that followed the great almost reveal felt different from the very beginning. Christmas did not sneak up on the family this time. It did not arrive like a surprise guest who had lost the invitation. It walked in openly, hanging its coat in the hallway and asking where it should put the decorations. The secret was no longer entirely secret. Ethan knew. His parents knew that he knew. Everyone knew that everyone knew. And yet, somehow, the magic did not quietly pack its bags and move out. It stayed. It just rearranged the furniture. By early December, the Santa suit was out of the wardrobe more than usual. Not for full operations yet, but for small trials, adjustments, laughs. One Saturday afternoon, his dad found it half unfolded on the bed. Trying it on, he asked with a hint of teasing. "Maybe," Ethan replied. The truth was, the idea of wearing the suit himself again had been bouncing around in his head for days. Not as a prank this time, not as a surprise, as an actual shift. A proper Santa shift done on purpose, with full awareness from everyone involved. They tested it in pieces. First the hat, while they decorated the tree, then the jacket, over Ethan's regular clothes while he helped Laura in the kitchen. At one point he wore the beard for a grand total of 30 seconds before declaring it an enemy of breathing and retiring it back to its hook. Lily found the whole process hilarious and thrilling. She was old enough now to understand that the man in red was in fact the same man who complained about traffic and taxes. She was also young enough to still enjoy the performance anyway. One evening, as they sat around the table with hot drinks, she announced that she did not really care who wore the suit as long as Santa behavior standards were maintained. Santa behavior standards, she explained, included high-quality wrapping, proper snack appreciation, and at least mildly embarrassing ho-ho-ho per year. After a brief family debate, it was decided that year they would share the role. Daniel would handle the more official parts, the late-night present arranging, the careful tiptoeing, the traditional snack nibbling. Ethan would be on early shift. He would become, as Lily declared proudly, the starter Santa, the first wave, the preview. So, on Christmas Eve, the living room became a backstage area more than ever before. The late afternoon passed in the usual blur, cooking, cleaning, arguing gently about oven temperature, trying to be sure the cat next door had not adopted their welcome mat as a personal bed again. Dinner was loud and warm. Someone knocked over a glass. Someone told a joke that was technically bad but received polite laughter anyway, the usual. After the plates were cleared and the television provided its standard background glow, Lily was allowed to open one small present, a harmlesser, new socks with snowmen. She reacted as if she had been gifted the crown jewels. Then came bedtime for her. She stalled with the skill of a seasoned negotiator. One more story, one more glass of water, one more check on the snack plate for Santa and the reindeer. Eventually, after a level of patience from the adults that should probably have earned them an award, she settled under her blanket. Ethan stayed in her room for a moment longer. She looked up at him with that serious expression she got when something mattered very much. "You will make sure Santa remembers the extra gift from the secret stash, right?" she whispered. The secret stash was a small collection of items they had bought together for cousins and a neighbor who had been kind to them. Lily had fallen in love with the idea that Santa could occasionally outsource work to well-meaning siblings. Ethan nodded. "Santa will absolutely remember," he said. When she finally drifted off, he slipped out, closing the door quietly. In the hallway, his dad stood waiting, holding the Santa jacket. "You ready, apprentice?" Daniel asked. "As ready as I will ever be," Ethan replied. They stepped into the bedroom and closed the door behind them. The room felt different now, less like a secret operations center and more like a dressing room before a small, important play. Ethan put on the trousers, which now almost fit without elaborate folding. The jacket settled on his shoulders with only a small amount of extra fabric. The belt cinched easily. The boots were still a bit heavy, but he managed. He skipped the beard this time. Lily already knew the face underneath. There was no need to pretend otherwise. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a reflection that surprised him. He did not look like a child playing dress-up anymore. He looked like someone in training. His dad adjusted the hat just a little. His eyes were proud and a little watery, as if dust had suddenly decided to exist in the air for emotional reasons. "You look good," Daniel said. "Proper Santa energy." Ethan rolled his eyes a little, but inside the words warmed him. They stepped out into the hallway. The already familiar quiet of Christmas Eve wrapped around them. "All right," his dad said. "Early shift first, then I take over for night duty." Ethan walked toward the living room, boots thumping softly. The tree lights glowed, the snack plate waited. The presents that were safe to reveal early were stacked in a corner. He took a deep breath and stepped into the role. For the next half hour he moved like a Santa who had studied under a particularly practical mentor. He checked tags, sorted gifts, arranged them with some artistry. He wrote a short note to Lily in his most careful Santa handwriting, thanking her for her belief and her excellent management of Santa behavior standards. His dad watched from the doorway, staying out of the way, but beaming. At that point Ethan caught his own reflection in the dark television screen. There he was, Santa, or at least one of them. He realized with a faint surprise that he did not feel silly, he felt responsible. When his part of the work was done, he returned to the bedroom and slowly stepped out of the suit. His dad put it on, stretching the fabric in familiar places. The handoff felt official. "Nice work, Starter Santa," his dad said. "Thanks, Main Santa," Ethan replied. They shared a small fist bump. Later that night, as the Main Santa shift moved quietly through the apartment, Ethan lay awake for a while, listening. The sound of boots on the floor, the faint rattle of boxes, the soft clink of the snack plate being moved. He smiled, thinking about how many other homes were probably playing some version of the same scene. Different faces, different suits, same intention. The next morning he was woken not by his alarm but by the familiar small whirlwind that was Lily on Christmas morning. She burst into his room, practically glowing, waving the Santa note in the air. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, putting on an appropriately sleepy face. "Look," she said. He wrote back. He liked the standards. Ethan took the note, reading his own carefully disguised handwriting. "That is pretty cool," he said. In the living room, the tree looked like it had been attacked by a generous storm of wrapping paper and patience. Presents were arranged in a way that clearly bore both his and his dad's sense of order. As the morning unfolded, Ethan noticed something he had not seen before. He saw his dad watching him almost as much as he watched Lily, not in a worried way, in a quiet, evaluative, proud way. It hit him then. This was likely his dad's last Secret Santa shift. Not because the suit would be burned or the snacks outlawed, but because from now on, the secret part was gone. Next year, and the year after that, and the years after that, Christmas would still be here. The tree would still go up, the snacks would still be prepared, but Santa would officially be a team project from the start. This year was the last with even a shadow of that old one-man midnight show. That version, the version his dad had carried mostly alone for years, was ending. He watched Daniel leaning against the doorway, mug in hand, looking at his kids surrounded by wrapping paper and laughter. There was a softness in his eyes, a hint of goodbye to something only he fully understood. Ethan moved across the room and stood beside him. "Thanks for the shift last night," he said quietly. His dad glanced at him, smiling. "Could not have done it without my assistant," he replied. Ethan shook his head. "No, I mean all the years," he said. His dad looked at him properly then. For a moment the sounds of the morning faded around them. Daniel nodded once, slow. His voice came out a little rough when he said that it had been worth every crumb, every late night, every rap session that went wrong the first 3 times. "I like being the mystery," he admitted. Ethan shrugged. "You still are," he said. "Just a different kind now." Later that day, they all went into the city to walk around the Christmas market. The air was cold, their breath puffed out in small clouds, and the streets were full of people bundled in coats and scarves. Stalls lined the square, selling everything from handmade ornaments to suspiciously cheerful hot drinks. Lights were strung overhead like a net of tiny stars. There were Santas everywhere. One stood by a hot chocolate stand, ringing a small bell. Another sat in a chair in a tent, with a line of kids waiting for a turn on his lap. A third one strode across the square at high speed, clearly late for something, the fake beard flapping in the wind. Lily pointed them all out, narrating their differences. "That one has the best boots. That one has the best laugh. That one is definitely hungry." Ethan watched them too, but with a strange new clarity. He saw the tired eyes behind dun beard. The way another Santa flexed his gloved hand as if his fingers were stiff from the cold. He thought about all the different lives those people would go back to when their shifts were over. Some would go home to families, some to small flats, some to silence, some to noise. For a few hours, though, they all carried the same role, the same story, the same hope that their presence made someone's day a little lighter. He tightened his scarf and fell into step beside his dad. "So how does it feel being in retirement soon?" Ethan asked quietly. Daniel snorted softly. "Early retirement," he said. "I think I will still pick up the odd shift." Ethan grinned. "Casual Santa work." "Exactly," his dad replied. "Freelance." They walked on in companionable silence. At stall, a woman sold handmade ornaments shaped like tiny red coats. Lily insisted on buying none for their tree. She declared it the official Santa uniform badge. When they hung it on their tree that evening, Ethan noticed it did something to the room. The suit in the wardrobe was still the real thing. But this small ornament, this tiny red coat, was like a symbol of all of it. Past years, present ones, future ones. The last secret Santa shift had come and gone. In its place was something else. Not secret, not less, just different. Chapter 10. History of the Kid Who Knew. Years later, on another quiet December night, the snow finally decided to cooperate. It drifted past the window of a different apartment in a different building in the same city, soft and slow, making the streetlights look like they were underwater. Inside, the living room was a familiar kind of chaos. There was a tree, slightly crooked but doing its best. There were fairy lights that had fought hard against tangling and mostly lost. There were snack crumbs on the coffee table that might or might not attract invisible reindeer later. On the sofa sat Ethan, a little older now, a little taller, the sarcasm in his voice more refined, the warmth in his eyes more visible when he forgot to hide it. Next to him sat Lily, younger but no longer quite a little kid, wrapped in a blanket with small snowflakes on it. Across from them sat their younger cousin Max, around 8 years old, eyes narrowed with the intensity of someone deep in a seasonal crisis. "So," Max said, "I think I know." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Know what about Santa?" Max replied. The word landed in the room with all the drama it always tried to carry. Laura and Daniel, from the kitchen doorway, exchanged a quick look that said, "Here we go again." It was a look they now wore with less dread and more quiet amusement. Ethan patted the seat next to him. "Come on," he said. "Sit." Max climbed onto the sofa like he was approaching a courtroom witness stand. "I saw the wrapping paper in the cupboard," he announced, "same as the presents. And Uncle Daniel sounds exactly like Santa. And we do not have a chimney, so the whole thing makes no sense anyway." He folded his arms with the solid certainty of someone who believed they had cracked the case wide open. Lily glanced at Ethan, a half-smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. Here it was, the moment he had been moving toward for years without quite realizing it, the chance to tell the history, not the official version, the version he had lived. He leaned back a little, looked at Max, and spoke in the calm, slightly sarcastic tone that had become his default setting. "You know," he began, I used to think the same way. Max frowned. You thought Santa was silly? He asked. Not exactly, Ethan replied. He told him about a small boy in snowman pajamas in a third-floor flat many years ago who had noticed the same wrapping paper under the tree and in his parents' drawer. He told him about a ho-ho-ho that sounded exactly like a dad trying out a voice in the kitchen. He told him about opening a wardrobe and finding a red suit hanging there, slightly dusty, smelling of aftershave and detergent. He left out names at first. He spoke in the third person. The kid, the dad, the mom. Max listened, eyes wide. Lily listened too, even though she knew this story by now. There was something soothing about hearing it again, like your favourite song at the right volume. Ethan continued. He talked about how that kid had felt when he put all the evidence together. Note betrayed, at heartbroken, just quietly older. He explained how the kid had decided not to ruin it for his little sister, how he had chosen to keep the secret, how he had tested things gently, moving belts and boots, shifting hangers, and watching his dad doubt his own memory instead of Santa. Max snorted at that, delighted. He described the carrot tower in full detail. He reenacted the way his dad had tried to eat from it carefully while dressed as Santa, not wanting to destroy the structure completely. He talked about the night Santa met Santa, the tiny Santa in the oversized suit walking into the living room, the dad in his sweater, staring like his reality had taken a wrong turn in the hallway. Max laughed so hard he almost slid off the sofa. This is like a movie, he said. Yeah, Ethan replied. It felt that way. Then his tone softened, the sarcasm easing back to make room for something else. He told Max about what he had heard through thin walls. His parents wondering when to tell him the truth, his dad not wanting to let go of the Santa role, his mum trying to find a gentle way to land the conversation. He explained that for his dad the Santa suit had been more than fabric. It had been a job title. A sign that, at least on one night a year, he could absolutely make good things happen. He told Max how they had finally talked, how his dad had tried to confess, how he had cut in and admitted he already knew. He described the relief on their faces, the way the truth had not shattered anything, it had just rearranged it. Max was quiet now. So you knew for years, he asked. Ethan nodded. Why did you not tell them, Max asked. Because I liked watching them try, Ethan answered simply. He explained that once he saw how much work went into the story, he did not want to throw it away just to feel clever for 5 minutes. He realized that the story was not really for the kids only. It was also for the adults, who needed to feel like they could still surprise someone. He glanced toward the kitchen, where his parents pretended not to listen and failed. He talked about Lily, the school incident, and the hallway explanation about stories being real in different ways. He mentioned the small bracelet under the pillow, the secret Santa-style gift he had arranged himself. He told Max how that felt. It felt good, he said. Not because I tricked her, but because I knew I was adding something kind to her morning. Max thought about that. So is Santa real? He asked finally. The question was a familiar. It never got simpler, but over the years, Ethan's answer had settled into a shape he trusted. He said that Santa was as real as people decided to make him. He said that if you defined Santa as a man who lives at the North Pole with flying reindeer and a perfect understanding of chimney physics, then maybe not. But if you defined Santa as a team of people who stayed up late, wrapped presents, baked cookies, and did whatever they could to make a cold morning feel warm, then yes, completely real. He added that every time someone bought a present quietly, wrote from Santa, and smiled at the idea of a kid waking up excited, that was Santa. The job title was shared, the name was shared, the work was shared. Max sat with that for a minute. Then he asked, slowly, if that meant he could be Santa too. Ethan felt a small, deep satisfaction unfold in his chest. That was the right question. Absolutely, he said. He told Max that being Santa now meant he was eligible for certain responsibilities. Helping with wrapping, suggesting gifts, not spoiling surprises for younger kids. It also meant he had to treat the story kindly, not mock it in front of others just to look impressive. Not be the first one in class to shout the secret like a headline. Max nodded, serious now. I can do that, he said. Lily leaned in. It also means, she added, that you must respect Santa behavior standards. Max perked up. Which are, she began listing them with great authority. No complaining about food during holiday dinners, at least one compliment per day for someone who cooked or wrapped something. 0 bragging about how you know the truth to people who are not ready to hear it. Max accepted the terms with the solemn gravity of someone signing a very important contract. In the kitchen, their parents moved around quietly, giving them space. After a while, Max went off to inspect the tree, muttering about how being Santa meant he should closely examine the gift distribution. Lily followed, giving unsolicited advice about tag placement. Ethan stayed on the sofa, staring at the tree lights and thinking. The history of the kid who knew, he realized, had never really been about proving anything. It had been about shifting roles. Once, he had been the audience, then the skeptical observer, then the backstage spy, then the prankster, then the assistant. Now, somewhere between 10 and not quite grown, he was becoming the storyteller. He looked over at the small Santa ornament that still hung on the tree every year. The tiny red coat, the symbol of all those late nights and quiet efforts. He remembered being 8 and peeking through a doorway at a slightly crooked beard. He remembered being 9 in an oversized suit, making his dad doubt reality. He remembered being 10 and listening to his dad admit that the Santa mask had helped him feel like a better father in messy years. He remembered the way knowing the truth had not ruined anything. It had just pulled the curtain back enough to show him the stagehands, the props, the sketches. The work behind the magic had turned out to be its own kind of magic. Snow tapped gently at the window. The room hummed with the low sounds of a winter evening. He got up and walked into the kitchen. His dad stood at the counter rinsing mugs. His mum leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching the kids in the other room with the content exhaustion of someone who had done this for a long time and still somehow cared about getting it right. Ethan cleared his throat. Max knows now, he said. His parents looked at him. How did it go? His mum asked. He shrugged. I told him about the wardrobe and the suit and the carrot tower, he said. And that Santa is a team project. His dad chuckled. That carrot tower is going to outlive us all, he said. Laura smiled. Is he all right? Yeah, Ethan replied. He wants in. They exchanged a glance full of that familiar mixture of relief and nostalgia. Another kid had crossed the invisible line. Another believer had shifted to the other side of the story. Ethan stood there for a moment, then added almost casually, You know it never really stopped feeling special, right? His mum tilted her head. Christmas, he said. Even after I knew, it just changed job titles. Daniel put down the mug he was holding and looked at his son properly. Thank you, he said simply. For what? Ethan asked. For not blowing it up when you could have, his dad replied. For giving us time. Ethan shrugged, a little embarrassed. I got good stories out of it, he said. He walked back into the living room. Max was now explaining to Lily how reindeer might need snacks with more advanced nutrition profiles. Lily was arguing the legal rights of carrot towers. Ethan sat back down, stretched his legs, and let the sound of them wash over him. He realized that day, maybe sooner than anyone expected, there might be new, smaller kids in the family. New wide eyes. New careful letters written in messy handwriting. When that happened, he would have the history ready. He would tell them about the boy who found the suit in the wardrobe and decided not to destroy the myth. He would tell them about the complicated feelings adults had when they tried to let go of the story. He would tell them how knowing the truth early had not made him bitter, just attentive. He would tell them that some myths were not there to trick you. They were there to give people a script for kindness. One day he might hand down the red suit itself. He imagined hanging it in a new wardrobe, a little more worn at the cuffs, fabric slightly faded from years of Christmas light. He imagined placing a hand on the sleeve and thanking it silently, the way you might thank an old friend at the end of a very long conversation. Thanks for the chaos, he would think, and for the magic too. For now, though, the suit still lived down the hall. The tree still glowed. The kids still argued about reindeer. And somewhere between the wardrobe and the living room, between the late-night snack plates and the early-morning wrapping paper storms, the story of Santa continued. Not because anyone believed in chimneys that bent physics, because they believed, stubbornly, in the value of trying to make each other feel a little warmer in the cold. Ethan smiled to himself, listening to Lily and Max debate stocking placement. The history of the kid who knew was no longer just in his head. It was out in the room now, shared. The myth had been unmasked and had somehow survived, softer and truer than before. He leaned back, watching tree lights blink lazily, feeling the steady hum of his home around him. Somewhere in a wardrobe, a red suit waited for its next shift, and in the quiet space between knowledge and belief, the kid who knew finally settled into his role, not as a skeptic, not as a debunker, as a keeper of stories, of effort, of a certain ridiculous red coat and everything it had meant. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the peace of the winter night rest on him like a blanket. Some myths, he decided, were worth keeping even after you had seen the zipper on the costume.